health with proper pruning, how to do clear specifications and proper descriptions, something Dr. Gilman was talking about earlier, and then really making good decisions about removing branches, which is another thing that Dr. Gilman was talking about. And then last is a semi-bonus. If you haven't already been really instructed on managing EAB, I got involved with people involved with EAB through Society of Municipal Arborists back in 2007 and 2008. And we created a workshop back in 2008, and I've been watching EAB travel across a lot of the North America, and we're just doing a crappy job of managing it. And if we wait too long, we're not going to manage it, we're going to respond to it. I want to try and help you with that. So just as far as some of the insects we have emerald ash borer. So it doesn't matter if your tree's healthy or not. If it's an ash tree growing in a place where emerald ash borer is, you have a choice. You treat it or you remove it. So pruning really doesn't help a lot with emerald ash borer, unless you're pruning branches to do sampling, which is a technique. Gypsy moth. So it attacks healthy trees, but healthy trees with a good crown density may be able to survive better than non-healthy trees because enough foliage can produce phenols that may reduce the larva viability. And we handle that by egg removal. Some of that can be done through pruning, and if we inspect our vehicles and things for egg masses, trying to limit the spread of it. But pruning can help. If we prune well, we won't remove so many foliage and we'll leave better crown density in our trees. Southern pine beetle, if you have bark beetles, we have in California, we have several different ones. And the biggest thing about bark beetles is they're attracted to wounds. So if we don't prune when the beetle's life cycle is active, we can help reduce the spread of the disease. The spotted lanternfly, that's a new one. It can weaken trees. We can kill the egg masses by chipping the wood into 1-inch pieces, and we can kill individual insects by crushing. But for pruning, again, we want to keep our trees healthy. A lot of the insects that attack trees with secondary infestation, if we keep the trees healthy, we can reduce it. Dutch elm disease, that's where I got my start in Brookfield, Illinois in 1977, and it was just hitting our town, and I was fortunate because the other big communities around us had been dealing with it for 5 and 10 years, and I learned in 3 months how to handle Dutch elm disease. And we were able to do a lot of removal of trees and managing, and we didn't really do much with root grafts because it was very difficult to do on rows of street trees. But again, reducing the wounding when the beetles are active can reduce the elm bark beetles flying, which is one way they spread the fungi. Hemlock woody adelgid, you'll see the white masses under the leaves. You'll see the nymphs over there on the left, or the larvae, I'm sorry. And on these, you might just prune dead and dying branches. Pruning is not going to necessarily remove all the insects because we might overprune the trees if they're really heavily. There was a mention of a possible beneficial insect that's taking it out, and I had some experience with that in whiteflies in California. Anthracnose, it hits maples, ash, London plane, or sycamore, and some oaks. In California, we have it really bad on our London plane and our ash, a little bit on some of the maples. I had personal experience with my Japanese maple with it. So the fungus attacks leaves and stems. If the temperature is wet and cool in the spring, it can affect the trees, and where it really hits hard is right before the buds pop. So if we get the wrong weather when the buds pop, could be a bad year for anthracnose. If we get the right weather, it could be a good year. A lot of times we sprayed all the time. It's this time of year, we got to spray for anthracnose. And we don't know if it worked or not because it's often weather related as much as spray related. And then the thing we can do with pruning is we can prune the dead branches, diseased branch tips and things, and get rid of the infected branches. The more we get rid of infected branches, the less incidence of disease is present to hurt the trees. Asian longhorn beetles, they have very deep holes. You might see sap exuding from the bark, like in number 5. It can affect the structural integrity of the tree as the wood starts to decay and dry out. It gets transferred by moving firewood, the same as emerald ash borer. And we might be able to use pruning to remove dead branches and weak branches if we can't remove the tree, but otherwise the trees, if they're infected, probably need to be removed. Beech leaf disease, we don't have very many beeches in California, just a very few, but it takes 1 to several years to kill the trees. It's by a small nematode that's, 50 microns or something in that center picture. And again, it's about moving infested wood and infected branches. And I was trying to see if chipping is effective to kill the nematodes. I couldn't find anything on it. Does anybody understand if that is possible? Because a lot of times by chipping things, it's small enough and it dries it out enough that that can take care of the nematodes. 10 caterpillars, they make a messy appearance in the trees. They're caused by the caterpillars that turn into moths. And the ways we can handle them is we can prune out either during their attack or after. We can remove the egg masses. We can treat with pesticides. A lot of times you can spray them with water. But again, pruning some of the trees and getting good healthy branches is a way to help the tree be stronger when these things happen. I guess oak wilt is just starting here in New York. We don't really have it yet in California. We got a bunch of oak problems in Southern California, where I'm at in Northern California. Fortunately, all their beetles haven't got to us yet. But it can be spread above ground by beetles. It can spread below ground by root grafts. And again, you want to avoid pruning in the spring and summer when the beetles are most active. And there is a way to sever root grafts. There was a picture I was able to find upper left-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, sorry. And they're severing the roots, and we understand about root pruning, if it's good or bad, depending on where it's done with the trees. And then in California, we have a lot of armillaria. We have Phytophthora. It looks like you have some here. In picture number 5, that's kind of what the Phytophthora looks like as it starts degrading the cambium, and most of these things are buried trunks where this happens. So we talk about how do we grow our trees properly. We plant them at the right depth. I was very happy to hear Dr. Gilman say trunk flare, because I'm a visual person. If it's a root flare, it should be below ground, because roots are below ground. If it's a trunk flare, it should be above ground, because trunks are above ground. And if I'm looking for the flare on the tree, I want to call it a trunk flare because I want people to see it above ground. But you're welcome to use any of those terms, trunk flare, root flare, flare, as long as we keep it exposed. And so armillaria on the left, on your right, I'm sorry. The white is the mycelium mats that come in. Usually you pull the bark away, and there's the matting underneath it, and it's kind of a beige color, sometimes a little squishy if it's still viable. If it's dead or if it's less active, it might be just firm. And how we treat this in California is we dry the trees out. So we'll expose the flare, we'll move the root crown out so we can find where the exposed armillaria is. And if it's not so decayed that the tree structure is bad, a lot of times the tree can outgrow the fungus. But if the fungus is outgrowing the tree, then it's going to be a problem. Because the trees put on new wood every year, so we can have hollow pipes that, like, there's very few flag rods, there's a lot of flag poles. So if we can have a hollow pipe with enough wood thickness, then we can keep these trees growing. And I've saved a lot of stool trees for people that people said they had to come down, and the tree had 4 big hardy roots on it with good trunk connection and enough 2 to 3, 4 inches of wood while in the pipe, and we were able to save those trees. We did a little bit of crown reduction, again, to take the leverage off of them, and we can save these trees that people want to have growing when other people just want to come in and take them down. And one of the things about the trunk wall thickness is I've had the privilege to work a lot of these fires. It's too bad we have these fires in California, but we're watching where these trees are failing. And it's usually about 1.5 inches of wood and less where we're seeing the failures. And as long as they have 3, 4 inches of wood, even if they're 36, 48 inch diameter trees, they're not breaking and failing. It's when they have, or they have a lot of complete decay on one side, so instead of being a circle, it's a U or something. Then we're seeing failures there. Okay, any questions about the diseases and insects? I probably won't be able to answer them any better than I just did, so you got all you got on that. But I want to talk about improving plant health, because avoiding wounding, reducing stress, retaining foliage, managing structure, adequate moisture for the root system, protecting the soil, using mulch so we get organic matter in the ground, and promoting resiliency. And I'm not saying, apply a bunch of additives and amendments. Sometimes we do that if mulch isn't working, or if the conditions in the soil, we do a soil test, we find out we really need something. But most of our trees growing in natural areas are doing just fine with their mulch and their own debris and litter. And we're so smart as humans, we come in and sweep all that stuff away. And wonder why our trees don't grow, but that's okay, because we can go give them a squirt of fertilizer or throw some powder down and we're all good. But the idea is to do 2 things. Promote the plant resiliency and be sustainable, because I worked in government for 30 years, and you can fix all the problems you want throwing money at stuff. until that little money spigot stops. And then you're stuck in the middle with, oh my God, you know, we can't throw money anymore and we're not finished. And the only time in my 30 years, well, there's 2 times in my 30 years that we got caught up on pruning. The first time I had a stack of pruning paper like this, I went to my boss and I said, Dick, what do I do? Look at all these. We make all the inspections, the trees can be pruned, and we're never gonna get to them. He goes, I got the solution. He dropped the whole stack in the garbage can. I was like, my mouth was bouncing off the desk in front of him, but he was correct. You're not gonna do it. Why would you have that stress in your system? Figure out the trees we can prune. Basically went through that list again and found the ones that were actually critical and put those on the list. And then I think it was 2004, and they changed my pruning budget from $360 to $220 in a budget cut, the same year that my contract pricing went from $94.50 to $145.50 for a 3-person crew for an hour. So I realized that my pruning was going to be cut about 25%. So what I did was I got with my crews, we talked about it, and we came up with a standard for what we felt was risk reduction pruning. And it was big dead branches, long, heavy, weak branches, and broken branches. And if the trees, we had those, we were going to keep them on the list. If they didn't, we were taking them off. So it was minor clearance, something that wasn't a safety issue. We took them off. So we went through and we got through like 85% or 90% of our pruning that wasn't really critical pruning that met all these standards. And so we're able to now cycle with good geographical setups. And in 30 or 45 days, I think, we caught up on all those pruning stuff. And then we went straight to block pruning except for emergencies. And that was the first time I was truly caught up on actually having pruned all the trees in our city. And it was amazing. So how do people stress trees? And we're so cute as people, we have names for it. We call it abiotic, right? But it's people stress. It's things we do. We have poor nursery stock root systems. Dr. Gilman talked about that this morning. We have poor nursery pruning of trees for structure. They destroy the structure. So when I look for trees in nursery, I'm not going to find a perfect tree, but I'm going to find the one that's prunable to make it right. And the only time that failed for me is I picked 30 Calvary pears for this project in Redwood City, and I picked them to plant them and prune them, and then I never got a chance to prune them. And so after 5 or 6 years, all the branches I would have taken out were already too far gone to prune. So poor planting, too deep, too small a hole, not managing roots, but trees can be buried besides too deep. In the Sacramento Tree Foundation, we plant about 15,000 trees a year with volunteers. And when I was on the A300 committee, they were calling this boutique planting of pedestal planting, where you take the tree out of the container, you take your bare root tree, or your bald or burlap tree, you make sure the flare is correct, and you measure from the bottom of the flare to the bottom of the root ball, or the bottom of the bare roots, or the bottom of the piece that was taken out in the bald and burlap, and that's the depth you dig the hole. So whatever diameter you need, 18 inches, 2 feet, to set that tree on, that's your pedestal. Then just like a donut in reverse or an X-ray donut, you can dig all you want around that pedestal, as deep, as loose as you want, and make nice soil for the roots to grow in, and hopefully break up some of the compaction and things. And then you set the tree on the pedestal and you backfill, and you stake it if you need to, and your tree is planted, and it's not going to settle on us. But people that do excavation with backhoes and excavation with crazy volunteers or crazy employees that got to dig, 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 dig. I call it a lazy hole. I think that would make people happy. Just dig a lazy hole. Take it easy. Dig the smallest piece where the tree is going to set, and then get crazy outside of that and help them come in and let that tree grow. We have poor irrigation, lack of moisture. We have that a lot of places. I look at solutions for that all the time. Wounding and unnecessary wounding, we do concrete repair and things like that. They bump the trees. We have, every time we prune a tree, we wound it. Every cut we make is a wound of the tree. Over pruning. In California, shade is really big. I mean, we have a lot of 3-digit days, 100 degrees and better. We have no rain, usually from April to October. And so the shade is really big in parking lots. And we make developers plant shade trees. And then they come in and they cut the tops of the trees off and they head them back and they top them. And they over prune them, and the trees are always stressed. And it doesn't help the tree stay healthy. It doesn't accomplish the shade we planted them for. We have root pruning where for different repairs, and if we over root prune, we can stress a tree. And then a lot of times we create the environments for decay and diseases, the way we scrape the soil off and do things, compact the soil, we underwater the trees, we overprune them, and we create those things that help. And then we also can overuse chemicals, amendments, and fertilizers in taking care of the trees. So what does resiliency mean for trees? It really is the ability for the thing to come back after something bad has happened. That's the short answer. So we want to keep our trees healthy enough that they can respond if something goes wrong to them. And we'd like to have that with people too. And so what we really want is that if the capacity of an ecosystem to respond quickly to the disturbance by resisting damage and recovering quickly, if that's what we're shooting for, then how do we help the trees grow in that manner? How do we assist the trees in staying vigorous, strong structure, reduce leverage and defects causing fouling branches, and minimize people-induced stress and minimize the damages and things the trees might cause? So how does pruning impact trees? As I said earlier, all pruning cuts are wounds, every one. If the sum of all the pruning wounds does not improve the tree, by pruning we're not helping the tree, we're hurting the tree. So why do the trees need to be pruned? Ed talked about it a little earlier today. Trees are pruned for people. Who's walked in the woods? Have you ever seen wood trees pruned if people weren't around? You know, they shed a few branches, but they don't prune. So who decides what branches to remove and why? Who are the people that do pruning? That's us. If we prune trees, we make those decisions. And so we need to really make good decisions with that. So trees have lived for a million years without people's pruning them, and they're still here. And we've been here a lot shorter, and we're doing a lot of other interesting things with the planet. So, but how can this be? You know, how trees are practicing resiliency on their own. The tree's job is to continue to growing. Has any of you ever seen a tree fall over and it's still alive? You know, 10, 20% of the roots are still in the ground. We looked at a burn site in California, and this coast live oak had fallen over, the root system was up in the air, and one of the roots actually is now the trunk of the tree, 10 inches diameter. It was an amazing picture. I couldn't find it to put in here, I'm sorry. So trees grow just fine without people. We bring the trees to the people, or we have targets on the trees that cause for the risk. If the tree's job is to continue to grow, they're resilient. These are, has anybody ever seen the giant sequoia trees? These are in California, about an hour and a half from my house. We went camping in there. It's Calaveras County. It's amazing, 1,000, 2,000-year-old trees, still growing fine. And these did survive a fire. So people create the need to prune trees. We're the ones that say, we got to prune these trees, we got to do this. And if we over prune them, we create the stress that can actually increase the need for other treatments. So when we look at how we're pruning, and Ed talked about this earlier, smaller cuts cover faster. Who thinks trees heal? Oh, somebody's got to think that. Okay. Trees don't heal, they seal or they cover. And they just grow another layer in the onion to cover it up. And they crawl over the little responsive growth or the reaction wood, whatever you want to call it, callus, and eventually they can close up. So the larger wounds take longer to do that. And as Ed showed in one of his slides earlier, if you see the heartwood there, and the heartwood's exposed, and it can decay. A lot of the nurseries, they top trees like crazy because there's no heartwood in the trees yet. They're still young. So the small pruning wounds on young trees are pre-heartwood. So they rarely result in decay. And that's why nurseries get away with the topping. And that's how they promote the trees. But who thinks that any species on Earth looks like a baby, just hatched or whatever, just birthed, looks like the mature adult? And yet the nurseries try and sell us trees that way. So pruning is, in my opinion, the #1 risk mitigation treatment practice for trees. We do it in cities for clearance, we do it in utilities for clearance, we do it in all kinds of ways. And it's done more than removals, although PG&E is trying to catch up with removals in California. It's very frustrating. So if we can remove leverage and likely failure points and retain trees with defects in responsive growth, we can keep these trees growing. If we do it pruning right, we can obtain our clearance and site views while still retaining the trees. And when Ed was talking about objectives, and I'll get that a little bit because how we tell people to do it is you got to have what the end result of the tree is going to look like, and I'll get there in a second. So here's the pruning conundrum for everybody. I have a pine, an elm, or an oak with very heavy end weights or severe included bark and a very high likelihood of failure. What should I do? 1, prune and possibly attract the beetles, or 2, leave it alone and take my chances? Who wants to go with 1? Who wants to go with 2? Okay, I'm going to go with 1, because if that tree does fail, it's going to wound anyhow, just like my pruning would have done. Probably a bigger wound than my pruning cut would have been. And all my pruning choices are now gone on that branch that fails. So if I prune as much dead branches as possible and have to make a couple cuts that solve that, that stop that from failing, I'm going to hopefully conserve the tree better. And if I let it fail, then even if I prune it or if it fails, it's probably going to attract the bark beetle at that point if the timing is right. So my approach in most situations, pruning will reduce the likelihood of failure unless the structure is so bad, whether it's the root system, whether it's the trunk, wood quality, broken branches. I mean, there's certain things that pruning doesn't fix. And if the branch fails, it's still a wound, as we said. But there has to be a target for the failure impact. So if we looked at the conundrum and there's no targets, then there's no conundrum because you have to do anything because there's no target for the branch to hit. And then, can I do less pruning with smaller cuts and smaller wounds than would have happened if the branch failed? And even then, can I support a leveraged branch with a temporary sling or rope or a prop or something that might keep it from failing? So, why are we touching the tree? That's what our objectives are in pruning. And that's what the A300 Part 1, revised in 2017, says. And Ed talked about that earlier this morning also. So these are a lot of the common pruning objectives. And one, the lower left one for managing health, is monitoring. I talk to a lot of clients and they have a bunch of dead branches in the tree. And I just tell them, so if you go out there tomorrow and see all these dead branches, you come back in 6 months and look at there again, are you going to remember if the branch next to that was dead or not? But if we prune off all the dead branches for monitoring, and I come out there in 3 months and I see a dead branch, wow, in 3 months, 1 1/2-inch branch died. Or if I come out in 3 months and 10 1/2-inch branches died, I get a feeling what's happening with the tree and it helps me do a better job. And these are great objectives, but this is not how I want to end my objective. And what I learn is that we rarely communicate what the tree will look like after we're done pruning with the work, when the work is done. How many people show their clients a picture of what the tree's going to look like when they're done? Or clearly tell them what's going to happen? I've started doing that because it's very nice. Who goes to a barber or a hairstylist? Okay, if you're a male, or I should say that, if you go to what's typically a men's barber, and we're in 2022 now, when you walk in there and they say, what do you want done to your head? And you look at the chart and you say, I want to be number 27 or number 25. And when a person comes out of a men's barber shop, you know they were cut. It's like going to the military. You come out, you know you're cut. I mean, I went for a haircut on Thursday and I said, just take it easy. I just want a light cut, and I still got overcut. Now, when you go to a typical lady stylist, what happens? Most of the people that go in there say, I want to look like this supermodel. And they pick a picture they want to look at, and the stylist does it. And if you're a partner of someone that comes home from a stylist, you go, you paid $150 for what? What did they do? Because the hair doesn't look cut, even though it's styled.
Yeah, but does it look like a supermodel?
Well, I'm not going there. So the difference in it is that when the men's barber does the work, we know that the hair has been cut. And when the stylist does the work, we don't even know the hair was cut, we just know it looks good. So how do we prune our trees like a lady's hairstylist? The hair is still full. Some cutting has occurred, but it's not the extreme cutting that we get from barbers. And with a tree, the foliar crown is still full, the tree has a natural appearance to it. So I'm on the A300 committee in 2016, and somebody comes up with this silly idea of calling pruning systems. I'm like, what the hell is that going to do? But as we started discussing, I started thinking about it. I go, well, if it's supposed to be a natural-looking tree, you can't pollard it. That's a good thing. If it's supposed to be a natural-looking tree, you can't really cut it in half unless you call it a modified natural system for a specific reason to cut half the tree off. Maybe it's power lines or whatever. So I went with the system thing, and I really like it. Because if you say you're pruning it natural, you know it's supposed to look like a tree when we get done. And a tree when we get done is not a lion's tail tree. A tree has a full crown on it. And I think that's really important. And the interior foliage is retained, creating the future branches for reduction pruning. When Ed was showing some of his slides on people pruning, they were out in parts of the tree that many climbers cannot get out to. So the biggest challenge we have is getting to where the branches need to be pruned. And that's where we can get an aerial lift, or those new walker things in there that you can get aerial lifts up. We get less skilled people doing better pruning. But most people, they sit in the crotch of the tree with their chainsaw or their pole saw, and they cut everything stripping out up the tree. Now, how do trees grow? They grow from the terminal buds and the branch tips outward. So if I push everything outward, am I just accelerating that leverage point, that extra weight? It's the wrong thing to do. So a robust objective will help clarify the end result. Prune to provide building clearance while retaining as large a crown as possible. Prune to resist the risk of branch fall, retaining as large a crown as possible. Let people think we're keeping a full crown. We want as big a crown as full a crown. We're going to bring those end weights in like Ed was talking about earlier. And as we look at the picture to your left, there's an A, B, C, D. There's 4 different ways we can create clearance on that house. And if we don't explain them well, and even above A, we could do smaller pruning cuts and create the clearance. And a lot of people bid on job do clearance and they'll make one cut where A is or B is, and they'll get their clearance, but the tree is not going to be treated well. Parking lots, they kill me because they want sign clearance. I got a good slide for this in a few minutes. But we want to see the trees in the upper left hand where the clearance is achieved by raising the crowns up and getting the branches clear. Where's the line of sight come from? From where you're sitting to wherever the sign is, 10 or 15 feet in the ground. It's not over the top of the trees to the sign like most people try and prune. It just doesn't make sense to me. So this tree I got called out to because this pile of logs right here was from the tree next door, where one branch fell and one large leader fell, damaged 2 cars and a fence and a bunch of other stuff, and the lady had the tree removed. And the people that own this tree, which was dedicated by the Sacramento Tree Foundation as a heritage tree for Sacramento County, this branch out here came out 75 feet, and these other branches were a little bit big. I looked at it and I said, okay, we want to, again, get rid of the leverage point to take the weight off. So I basically showed them, here's how we'll have, this is about what the tree will look like when the contractor gets done. Now the person making the prunings have to figure out which branches to do to reduce some of those branches and bring them in. And this one here was 75 feet long, and the tree company called me and go, you sure you want us to take 20 feet off of it? I said, yes, because again, if that branch fails, taking 5 or 10 feet is not going to take the weight off. When you have a 75-foot horizontal branch, that's too much weight on a branch attachment. So we pruned it back, and the tree had a very nice canopy to it. It was natural, and it came out great. The tree is still there. And how can you, again, the person making the cut's going to figure out where they do that to shrink this crown down to somewhere in here. And most of the cuts have to be inside with the edges because we're not doing heading cuts. We're cutting back so the branch tips are out at that point. Here's some more, is how we can show people what we're doing or show the tree care company what we're thinking when we start doing the work. So here's my observations. In the proper pruning examples that I've seen, the natural shape of the tree is retained, and the crown density is retained. There's a lot of foliage left on the tree. Most of the pruning is in the outer quarter to third of the crown. Occasionally you have to move a branch in the middle, but that's not where the majority of the pruning is. And the focus is on removing less than 20% of the foliage on some trees, and less than 10% of the total foliage for the entire pruning project. And so a lot of times we're trying to, and I'll get to the reasons to explain this, if I'm taking off 20% of the leverage weight on 1 or 2 branches, that's still only taking 5 or 10% of the total foliage out of the tree. It's not taking a lot. The original ANSI A300, well, 2 versions ago, said, you know, do not remove more than 25% of the foliage on a tree during any annual pruning. Well, people were removing 25% where the tree is needed or not. Because they said, oh, we got to remove 25% of the foliage. No, the idea is now it says only remove the amount of live foliage you have to achieve your objective. So we have to be able to get to the ends of the branches where the pruning is being performed. And for homeowners and volunteers, it's real easy. How many people prune small trees? Okay, who hires you to do it? The property owners? If you work for a city, do any cities prune small trees? I've been at SMA, and 1 city out of 25 in the room prune small trees. Not because they don't want to, because we don't have the budget for it. We have limited budgets, we got big trees with a lot of risk, And that's what we focus on. We don't focus on the small trees. And so, you know, it's more difficult if you go to the tree climbing competitions at the ISA or your chapters. You see how these people get out that are really good climbers, get out to where they touch the ribbons and do this pruning. We have to be able to train that better so more people can do it, or we have to get aerial lifts or other ways to help people get where they have to be. But just because I can't get there doesn't mean I should make the wrong cuts. Now, how much foliage should we remove? So, anybody hear of General Motors, Chrysler, or Ford? They have 3 shifts. So if I remove 1/3 of the foliage on a tree, I just laid off my entire night shift at one of these auto companies. If I take off 2/3 of the foliage, I got rid of my swing shift and my night shift. And if I take off all the foliage right atop the tree, I just laid off all my workers. So for the auto industry, who's going to make the cars? For the trees, who's going to do the photosynthesis? Now the trees don't go to the union hall and bring people back. They just pop every latent bud or every adventitious bud they have to try and get their foliage back, because they're responsive organisms. They need leaves to grow. So a typical business practice, anybody have a typical business practice? Who has 100% production in your business practice? We don't have it. If we get 80, 95%, we're doing really well. We have sick leave, we have vacations, we have safety meetings, we got all kinds of things that take away from production. So if we can only prune the trees, removing the live tissue needed to accomplish the objective, and focusing on 10 to 20% foliage removals on most species, then we're going to be in the ballpark of having our tree business running with 80, 95% of its foliage and workers. There's a lot of neglected trees that might need more, trees that haven't touched for years and years and years. And in some of those situations, I try and come in a 2- and 3-phase pruning approach, because if I over prune, the tree is going to sprout back out, and I've got a great example of that. So how did I come up with this 15% figure? Has anybody heard of tree biomechanics? Okay, it's been, I think, 3rd or 4th cycle now, and it started out at Davie. They had this property in Ohio with a bunch of trees that they planned to grow out they weren't going to do anything with. Instead of just cutting them down, they said, well, let's let these guys come in and test them. So they've been doing all these crazy tests and stuff with the trees. And John Goodfellow out of Seattle, he did a research project. He's a utility arborist consultant. And he did a bunch of testing and pulling, and his results were that if he can reduce the end weight leverage on a branch by 15%, it will reduce the risk of that branch failing by 50%. So that's a very small amount of foliage removal for a large amount of risk reduction. And it's written up in biomechanics. They've got books. I'm sure the ISA has them. You can contact John Goodfellow in Seattle if you want it. There's his symposium. And he told me about this. I think we were in Fort Worth, Texas at the ISA meeting. He told me about that. I was like, holy cow, that's great. And if I can then reduce my end weights by 15, maybe even 20% of really long branches like that 75-footer, I'm still keeping a crown. And I mean, to retain the interior foliage, which are the branches I'm going to have to cut back to in the future anyhow. So again, here's the natural pruning. We're writing specifications to tell people what we want to do, because what is the purpose of specifications? It's to lay out the work so that it can be checked if it's thumbs up or thumbs down. Who's bid on a project that had specifications? Okay, I wrote specifications. I had to write them so that somebody couldn't come in, do some crappy work, and meet my specifications. I wanted high quality work. Whether it was sidewalk repair, whether it was root pruning, whether it was sidewalk demolition, whatever it was. I had to write the specs so that they got it done right. So we're going to talk about the wording and specifications. So we got our systems. Look at the systems we have. If we say natural, it's got to look like a tree. Okay, so and Ed talked about this a little bit this morning. We have to have a robust and descriptive objective. The pruning system, the type of parts to be removed. It could be living or dead. The location, the crown for the parts are removed. The pruning amount. Could be percentage of foliage or weight, number of branches. But I agree with Ed that just saying a percentage of foliage is very hard to check if you don't see the tree before. Who's seen a tree really poorly pruned, way over pruned, you think, and you didn't see it before, and then you saw a picture of it before and go, oh, it had all broken branches on it from a snowstorm or an ice storm. So if you don't see it before, it's really hard to predict the percent foliage. So the number of branches, number of wounds is much easier to tell. The size range of branches, Ed touched on that really well today. You pick the diameter of the largest diameter cut to be made. The pruning cut types, I'll get those just a second. There's 3. Branch removal, reduction, and heading. There's only 3 ways to remove a tree. Any other information that you need for your project, such as branch cleanup, brush cleanup, delivering cutting firewood and moving it, or if we're going to leave the wood chips or take them. And again, if we can use a photo of what's going to happen, it helps us better. So in previous A300, these were the methods to prune trees: clean, thin, raise, reduce. Okay, so of these, the only one that's a true cut is reduce with the reduction cut. Cleaning, if I'm removing branches, it's either going to be a branch removal cut, a reduction cut, or a heading cut, and remove dead, a specific disease branch. I'll get into that in a second. And the same thing, thinning. Thinning means, as a human, I'm telling the tree what branches I'm going to remove from this tree for my knowledge, not whether the tree needs it or not. And we did get thinning out of the 2017 standards, and I get a lot of grief for it, but I'm so happy because thinning a tree is not what the tree needs. The tree needs branches removed for a specific reason. So here's the 3 ways to remove branches. We've got on your left the branch removal cut, and there's different ways we make that cut to avoid damaging the parent stem. So again, we want to prune trees and not harm the trees. So if the part that's staying is here and I cut back here, I'm wounding the part of the tree I want to keep. So I want to make sure that I'm just removing the part of the tree I don't want, not damaging the part I want. Reduction cut, very simple, and the heading cuts. Okay, and those have been around for a while. That hasn't changed at all. And here they are next to each other, so we can see how they might look next to each other. One thing, we can't structural prune a tree. That's an objective. We prune the tree to improve structure. There's no such thing as structural pruning. It's not a way to remove branches. It's an objective. So to structural prune doesn't mean that Russ, structural prune the tree, he's going to know exactly what to do. He's going to have to, if he's never seen the trees, we've got to go look at it, figure out what to do, as Ed was talking about, and how he figures out how to prune the tree. So there's no way to structurally prune, but there's ways to remove branches, and with good specifications and good decisions and making those cuts in the right places and optimal places, we can improve the structure on the tree. So the old cleaning, remove dead, dying, weak, struck, broken, diseased branches. So if I give somebody permission to remove a dying branch, that means if the bottom 8% of the tips, or the farthest 8% of the tips are dying, they can remove the whole branch because I gave permission to remove a dying branch. If it's a diseased branch, who has anthracnose or powdery mildew? We just gave somebody permission to remove every branch that had anthracnose or powdery mildew. Crossing branches. It kind of depends which angle we're looking at it. But if I look at the tree several different ways, I can see a bunch of crossing branches. And if there's crossing branches that are really a problem, do we need to remove both or just one of them? We want to remove the one that's probably damaged by the crossing or the way the foliage is growing, interrupting the tree. And thinning. We just gave a person to do a barber haircut on some tree that doesn't need it. So the clear description can appear to be a lot of work. Fortunately, there's a thing called word processing in computers now, making it easier. And a lot of us have work systems where we check boxes and things. There's ways to make it work. The real key is what part of the tree the branches will be removed from. Where is that in the tree? And the size of the cuts we intend to make, trying to get as small as possible and getting as far from the trunk as possible. Because if we make these big wounds on the trunk that take 5, 10, 15 years to cover, we're just opening that trunk up to trunk decay. I have done some heading cuts 6, 8 feet from the trunk to avoid making a much larger cut right at the trunk and hopefully get some sprouting on that branch if it's still alive. So the alternative to poor descriptions and lazy specifications is going to be improper work or incorrect work that we approved. Incorrect work can happen, but I don't want it to be work that I approved. So again, we used to say this, and it gives permission to remove a lot more branches than we probably intended. And here's somebody removing all dead, dying, diseased, and crossing branches. Just what I wanted. Again, what does the work in the tree? We talked about the leaves and trying to get as much of a crown as we can and possible. And Ed talked about, in his pruning, he was talking about plumbing earlier this afternoon. I don't look at the trees as having plumbing for which way the water is flowing. I look at the leaves as being the gas pedal on the tree. If I got 50 leaves over here and 30 leaves over here, 50 leaves is going to grow a lot faster. So if I have 2 branches that have 50 and 50, and I want this one to be the dominant leader, I'm going to reduce this one maybe to 40 or 30 leaves. And this one will grow faster. And I've done this on many trees, including the disgusting flowering plum in front of my house, the purple leaf plum. But I got to move the 3.5-inch leader here to now a 5.5 leader here with a 4-inch leader here by doing changing where I want the most leaves on the tree. And it still looks like a crown that has a nice tree on it. You know, so we can't put stuff back after we take it off. So do those branches really need to be removed? And again, there's times we have to take a lot of foliage out of a tree, but it should not be the norm, and it should not be how we sell our work. This is a tree that Brian Kemp down in Visalia that Ed was talking about. He worked with Ed on the details and the specification descriptions. Brian had this tree right outside his house. It's a coast live oak. It's a valley oak, Quercus lobata, in Visalia. The tree company came out. They pruned the tree in the upper right-hand corner. They thinned it. Now, for me, there's some issues with weight here. There's some, where I want to adjust some leaders. They didn't address any of that, but they thinned the tree. A year later, lower right, that's what it looked like. And 2 years later, lower left, that's what it looked like. So 2 years after paying the person money and getting no benefit from it, the tree's basically right back where it started from. And we didn't do any purpose to the tree at all, but people felt good about it. And the person saw the pile of brush that they were paying for, so they probably felt good about it. So, why should we prune trees? Because as people moving trees to where we actually are living with trees, and for those that have worked with any planning commission or city council or county board or village board, nowadays you can't get a project approved if it doesn't have trees in it. However, I can Photoshop a redwood and a 2.5-foot planting strip and get my project approved. So the way trees are grown in the nursery, they're grown for sales, not for structure. They want the trees to look like a mature tree. They head the trees off, get all kinds of sprouting, and Ed showed pictures. I got pictures of how it happens. And the tree on the lower left is a Visalia tree that Brian grew, and it's a Chinese pistache. If you know, it's very multi-leader tree as it gets bigger. And here's some trees on the right that, again, they skinned all those low branches off that are there. And those low branches, especially in California, shade the trunk from getting sunburned because the bark on a young tree is very, very thin and easily burned. When you get bigger woody bark, it helps it protect itself from the sun. So this is a photo from Dr. Dick Harris, and this is a similar tree that wasn't pruned when, at this point, we had a couple choices. We could have probably taken it off here, but it probably should have been a few years ago. But we could even have taken it off here or here, as Ed kind of showed earlier. And again, slow down, put the brakes on the one on the right, let the left one grow up, hopefully get some sprouting somewhere between the main crotch and some of those lower branches on the left. And then eventually we could even, you have to take it off because the left one will so outgrow the right one that it may actually turn into a branch collar. And here's some of, I'm sure it's Ed's drawings where it's how you thin the tree. And this one probably took off a little over 25% of the foliage. It's hard to tell exactly, but we left the right branches on. And what it's going to do is it's going to slow this one down and let this be the dominant leader on the tree. And this is downtown Visalia, kind of similar pictures that showed earlier. And these are trees that were headed in the nursery. And they're all multi leaders right at these crotches here, and that's a recipe for disaster. And we see it happening all the time. We see all these things here. And then on your right-hand picture, you see how the branches break out. What's really interesting is there is no branch attachment at the top of these phalliars because it's included bark. There's no connection up there. So it's just the things on the bottom holding it up where the trees sometimes will put extra wood on. Who knows how the trees know where to put their wood on? I can't figure it out. All I know is it happens. Right? You see a tree with included bark and it throws stuff on. It's got a decay spot, it throws extra wood around it, it swells up there. And we know what to look for when we're doing a lot of our risk assessment. How does the tree do that? We don't know. But yet we think we understand how the trees grow. Calorie repair, disastrous. But every place where it failed, there's no top attachment. You can see. And what does it look like when these things break out? We know what it looks like, the one on the right. So why do we encourage that type of growth in the trees? And again, here's a tree that was grown with a single leader, and here's a tree that was topped at the nursery, and there's a huge difference. And there's a huge long-term difference in how those trees are going to grow for us. So I'd like to more clearly describe the pruning work to be done. And, you know, it can be simple statements, but it's very clear. Is there any way to misunderstand that first sentence? Is there any way to really understand the second sentence? Okay, so these are previous terms in cleaning. We're removing dead branches, we're removing diseased branches, but specific diseased branches, not native disease branches. And shortening is, we're trying to get that leverage point out and that fulcrum point out. So here's some ways to describe where to remove the branches and what types of cuts to use. And I'll leave it up. This is going to be available. I'll make it available. You know, these are not always the best worded things. We keep working them again. But the idea is to be very clear where we're working in the tree, what we're trying to do, what we want the tree to look like when we get done. You know, we really want to, we can provide clearance from a building, but we want to tell what kind of cuts we're going to make to do that. If my finger's in the way, I'm sorry. And so here's a specification writing guide, and what I'll do is I'll send John, we have only used that, it's, you know, it's a 5-part form or a 6-part form that you can start filling in. You can put it in your computers if you want. And it's a way just to go through and show what's happening. Again, you'll have this if you want to use this to help you modify what you're doing. And then I use more and more photos now because with the cell phone, I can take a photo, I can draw what I want and get it to the client. If I'm doing a report, I'll show what I want the tree to look like at the end of the report. And if I'm working for a city that requires a permit for pruning, I want them to see what the permit looks like. Because when I'm the city guy, which I was, I've had people give me specifications and the tree didn't look like it came out. So if I have a before and after picture, now I can cite the person for improper pruning. And it's a big bonus for me as an agency person. Here's kind of the template form. And you know, it can be expanded a little bit more. I stuck a lot of stuff in number 4 that could be more, you know, more lines if you want to do it. Whatever works for you folks in your business to make your jobs better and help you is what's important. But I know I've been able to work with 3 cities, a bunch of HOAs, and where I find my time best used is I write the pruning specs and I spend the first day to 2 days with the contractor. And sometimes it's 2 hours, sometimes it's longer. If they get it, it's 2 hours. And I had one tree care salesperson. He's a great guy. He's a good professional, becoming a personal friend. They're working at Johnson Ranch that has a really big urban forest. And he goes, hey, listen, do me a favor. Tell the guys what you want. They don't listen to me. You tell them what you want. So I spent out there with the guys. I pointed where I wanted the branches, showed them why, what I was doing. I watched them do 2 trees and then let them go. And they did the pruning project great. A friend of mine's a town engineer for Loomis, which is a really boutique community with a lot of horse ranches and stuff outside of Sacramento. He just put a pruning contract out for clearance on the street. He's hiring me to work with the contractor that I know to help him make sure the trees get pruned right. And I told him, let me train your staff so they know what to do so you don't have to be hiring me. Let me get myself out of a job. So example specifications, So this is the way you can write it. I don't want to read it to you unless you need me to. Like I said, these will be available. But the idea is to make it very clear. And if you take this home and you see something that doesn't make sense to you, you'll see my email in a few minutes. Go ahead and email me or call me and let's talk about it, figure out a better way to write it. Because if I'm showing this stuff to people, I want them to be confident. Here's another one, a large tree. And you know, a lot of times it's just provided roof clearance. I had one big silver maple tree, and it had 2 branches over the house. I went out to visit the guy, and I told him all the different things he needed. He goes, okay, I want those 2 branches removed. He goes, what about it? I want those 2 branches removed. I wrote the sheet up, gave it to my crew. My crew gets out there. What about? He goes, he wants those 2 branches removed. Remove 2 branches and get going. You only got an hour and a half on this job. Let's go. Thank you. Okay, so again, the idea is if we're looking at only removing 15% of the foliage, and I'm making decisions when I'm looking at the tree, as Ed talked about earlier today, which branches do I want to remove to get that 15%? And if I'm really good, as he was making 1 or 2 cuts on the branch, I'm only making 1 or 2 cuts to get that 15%. And with some of our valley oaks in California, we've got these 16 and 20-inch branches with horseshoes in them and stuff like that. And I don't know what the structure is on those branches, but I've seen failures. So if I have a branch that's horseshoeing, and it's got probably 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of wood in it, and only 5% of the foliage, if I could take most of that branch out and get rid of all that weight and just a little bit of foliage, that's a hit for me. That's a real success. So which branches, where can I make those cuts in 1 or 2 cuts? Then the jobs aren't so expensive. Oh, it's so expensive to prune trees. Well, you're chipping brush for 2 hours, you know? You don't need to chip that much brush. So here's just some pictures, and none of these are perfect. As I look at stuff, I take pictures all the time, just ways to talk about them. The one on your right, you can see where some heading cuts were made. But the majority of the tree is at least still there. It wasn't completely topped like some of the parking lot trees. The one on the left, there were just a few heading cuts, and some of these might need more pruning. But again, you know, as you look at them, in the wintertime, it's the best way to look at trees for structure. If this thing was summer, it would look like just this big full crown. Now, again, street trees, who understands what live crown ratio is? Height of the tree compared to the height of the crown. Street trees always have a low live crown ratio because they're pruned up 15, 20 feet off the ground. When Dr. Harris said that the tree should have, is it half, 2/3 of the foliage in the top, how much of the foliage in the top 2/3, whatever that number is. Most of the foliage is supposed to be in the top 2/3, and instead it's in the top third on a lot of these street trees. It's just, they're set up for failure. And you know, you can see the trees that have mistletoe. So again, pruning mistletoe, in California we have mistletoe. If we can prune 2 feet below the infection, we can probably take the mistletoe out of that tree. If it's on the main leader, the dominant leader, or the main stem, we can't do that without making significant cuts. Then we have to come back and keep pruning the mistletoe every year. You know, when trees are in some really strange locations, you've got a southern magnolia right next to the roof. We've got these multi-leader, I think the pear right next to the, you know, the driveway, and we just have all these structural problems. So when I had my Cal repairs in downtown Redwood City, and the downtown, the shade made the downtown, and we had to come in and reduce, we had an 18-month pruning cycle to reduce them, because I couldn't let them get too big, even over the building. I didn't want the branches to get big and fall out. And we did try to hold the branches together with these holiday light strands, but it never really worked. And here's just some branches, trees I was working with, a landscaper who was putting in a couple hundred feet of root barrier. I was working with them. And looked next door and I saw how they prune these trees. You know, and none of these are terrible, none of them are great, but they're a lot better than what they could have been. I mean, there's things we could have done differently. And again, I don't know what the tops of these trees look like. A lot of people say the tree's too tall. Too tall for what? So what are the considerations you want to use in pruning? You know, we want to look at the health, the density of the foliage, does it have a central leader? I guess we're changing the word central leader to dominant leader now. So that's going to be in the new pruning standard. So I was like, okay, dominant works for me, I get it. Structure of the lateral branches, the branch attachments, end weights, overextended branches, they can be the same, they can be different. We have trees that have heavy end weights that don't stick out too much from the tree. And we wouldn't do thinning, we would do selective removal of branches, or smaller branches on those heavy tips to try and reduce the leverage. It comes out to thinning, but we're not doing it for thinning, we're doing it for a specific reason. And you want to understand the tree response. Healthier trees can respond better. And then we look at the space, the clearance, decay, if we're going to do things with harvest. Harvest is like, who has fruit trees? We prune our fruit trees for harvest, different from a shade tree. So humans over-prune trees. We have misunderstanding of achieving clearance in views. They top the trees to clear signs, remove whole branches. When downward growing tips would release some of the gravity and raise the thing up, we'd have to take the whole branch off. We do thinning to remove foliage instead of selectively removing branches. This is my upper left, my parking lot sign. So if I'm in a car, I'm looking at these arrows to the sign. But if I'm the guy that wants the trees pruned, I want the trees pruned for these arrows to the sign. And if I prune the trees for those, the trees are always going to be in the line of sight from the cars. If I prune the trees, again, when you raise them up like the one in front of the Publix, I get underneath them forever, just about. I worked for a school district, and they had trees were planted by the Sacramento Tree Foundation on 10-foot centers. They were flowering pear and evergreen Chinese elm, almost parvifolias. And they wanted me to reduce the top so they get their security cameras over the top. And I just said, I'll tell you what, These trees are overplanted. We're going to take out every other one and leave half of each species, take out every other one. And we're going to raise these things up. And stand right here. Can you see your camera? Yeah. We moved around. Stand right here. Can you see your camera? Yes. We raised all the trees up. It costs less to do the removal and the simple raising than to lower every tree that he wanted. I saved him over $1,000, and he didn't have to do it again for 3 to 5 years. We just had to move a few small branches. So we have choices when we prune. We want to accomplish the objective and retain as much foliage as we can on the tree, because the leaves are how the trees grow and how the trees stay healthy and less stressed. There's 3 pruning cuts we can make to move branches, and there's hundreds of choices in making those cuts on a tree. I don't know that I could ever say there's only one way to prune a tree. There's definitely only 3 ways to make cuts for removing branches, but there's a bunch of ways to prune the tree. Hopefully we're making the right decisions, taking away the right branches, the right cuts, and smaller diameter cuts will actually close faster, or usually close faster. And then we want to watch how the trees respond to the cuts we make, so we know that what we think is going to work is actually working. So for pruning small trees, we started training volunteers in Redwood City. We had a bunch of volunteers called City Trees get started up, and I got a grant from Caltrans for 23 monthly plantings consecutively. It was like, people aren't going to ask, is City Trees planted this month? They're going to ask, where is City Trees planted this month? Well, after 23 monthly plantings, they go, can we do 6 a year? I go, sure, you're your own group, the grant's over, you do whatever you want. And we did 6 plantings with them a year. But after 2 years of planting, these trees weren't getting pruned, and the city didn't have the money to prune them. So we taught the volunteers how to prune them, and went out and had prune-in pub, lop-in lunch, all kinds of things to help them go out and get the trees pruned for us. And if we really think that less is more with the foliage removal, and no harm, less harm pruning, how do we do that? And if we could train landscapers, who's a landscaper? You go to a property more than once a month. Okay, the people that are landscapers, if you have a pair of hand pruners in your pocket, and if I walk by a tree and go snip, 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 the owner is not even going to know I made those snips. And unless they have this branch they want to block their neighbor's garbage can with, and I'm very careful about what I prune and talk to them, I'm going to make their trees really healthy. They're not going to know about it. If that's not value added to my services, that I should be able to sell more and promote more and tell them what we're doing and show them before and after photos after 2 years of doing this, then I'm not a very good business person. Okay, any questions on pruning? All right, EAB management. As I said, I've been watching this, and I dealt with Dutch elm disease. So, unless we watch the jump from probably Chicago to Boulder with EAB, we can watch the EAB move across our state lines. It started here, it's moving, what, 20, 30, 50 miles a year, whatever it is. Well, if I'm even a bad mathematician, I can get Google Earth, figure out how many miles it is, divide that out by how many miles it's moving, and I know how many years I have to inspect it in my community. Now that's not a given, that's my starting point. Then I say, okay, if I wait till I find it in my community, it has already been there for 2 years. Who's found it in their community? Did it happen yesterday? It's been there for at least 2 years, maybe longer. We just didn't see it because it takes a while for the trees to die after they get killed by the bark beetles. So, and the trees aren't typically skipped by the insect. So if I know I've got 500 miles and it's moving 50 miles a year, I say, wow, I might have 10 years. Let me cut that in half and say I got 5 or 6. Okay, what do I got to do first? I got to inventory all my ashes to find out how many I got. What are my mass casualties going to be if this thing goes? Okay, of all these trees I just looked at, which ones do I really want to keep? It can't be all of them. Even if you're a total tree hugger, it's going to be 90% of them. You know, but even if you're really a tree manager, it's going to be somewhere around 40 to 60%. So that 40 to 60% that I'm not going to keep, why would I wait until the bug kills them to start swapping them out and have no choice in how I'm going to do my removals, no choice in how I'm going to do my treatments, because I got this mass kill going on. So now I can say, all right, let's plan this out. Let's pick out the trees that are the easy picks. No one's going to miss that tree. No one's going to miss that. Those are going to come out, and I can start replanting. So after 8 years, now I've got trees actually growing instead of waiting for the bug to come in and clear cutting on my forest. And then as we get closer, now maybe and it's going to change as the treatments change. Right now it's anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Let's say you get a treatment that's supposed to be 3 years. I go 2 years out, I start treating them. One, I want to make sure that I'm not missing my estimate of of 6 to 10 years, whatever it is. And second, I know that people are going to start getting used to this, and I want them to get used to the budget of having to treat the trees they want to keep. And then I can show that, look, 95% or 90% of the trees we treated haven't died. That's going to support my program, support me as the manager. And then we just remove the trees as we have to. Again, starting out, taking out the least ones, and getting more and more and more. And we've already built the inventory showing these, look folks, these trees are going to come out. Public meetings, whatever, get an expert to come in there and help you, get Rich Hoyer to come out and talk about it, you know, and talk about what has to happen with the management of the trees to maintain your forest. So Dr. Hoyer from University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, he did a study in Milwaukee. Milwaukee had Dutch elm disease in the early 1970s, before I got to Brookfield. They still have not recovered their urban tree canopy 50 years later. They still have not recovered it. They had a bigger canopy while they had all the elm trees than they have now. And yes, there's been some development, but the trees have had time to grow too. I mean, it's not that one-sided a ball game. So we're talking multi-generational stuff here. And if you really start looking at some of the research that shows in Ohio and some place where they've done longevity studies on humans, people that live on streets that were wiped out by emerald ash borer lost 2 years in their proposed life expectancy. It was reduced on the trees where they had this trauma in their neighborhoods. So there's all kinds of things that are going on now. And you know, we start looking at the value of trees and stuff. You know, trees are helping people improve learning. They're helping reduce recovery times in hospitals. They're reducing stress. Forest bathing, if you look at that, a way to relax people. There are physicians that are recommending trips through the woods instead of medication for people with ADHD. And it's working. Because we're so used to, as humans, give me something to take care of it. Give me my Advil, give me my whatever to fix my problem. Well, maybe your problem's not in the pill. It's some, as we talked to the previous speaker here, for those of you who saw it. The stress and stuff happens. We're not working on the stress. We're working on the cause of the stress. So again, as I kind of said, we inventory the ash, hopefully at least 3 years, preferably longer. We might not have that depending on where the bug is. Decide which ones we really want to keep. Plan to treat those trees at least 2 years before the infestation gets to town. And then as quickly as we can, remove the non-selected trees and start replacing them. If we could all do that, emerald ash borer would be a lesser issue than it is. And our budgets and things would support it. And this is what some of the ash trees look like. Who's going to climb these trees and do the removals? You're going to climb them? Okay. So the idea is, it's not safe for the workers. We could have avoided this by treating them, or we would have taken them out already. Or there will always be some we have to take out, because we're not going to beat the bug all the time. But we're going to be a lot less. And then there's some options. There's branch sampling, there's sampling for insects, trying to find out what the populations are, through trapping. There's a firewood log quarantine. I talked to the Forest Service back in 2008, and I said, how much is this going to cost you? How many billions of dollars is emerald ash borer going to cost you? And how many millions of dollars would it be to give free firewood to campgrounds? And the first joker that drives in with his own firewood, you fine him $2,500 and put on social media. You tell me how many people are going to bring firewood to the campgrounds. You're giving it to them for free, and if you got to raise your campsite price $1 or $2 when it's $8 a bale of wood, you're still not going to have people complaining. And of course, nobody's done it. Nobody listens to me. So here's my contact information. Again, if you have any questions, I will make it available, and I will do a secondary handout on what the pruning thing is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, so the ISA code is New York 2235. The DEC is New York 22417 326. Now this is the end of our classes for today. So we do have our meet and greet is next with the 50/50 raffle. We have a few gifts that are going with that as well. We have, yes, Bear? I will. So did I talk too fast again? All right, the ISA is 2235. DEC is 22417 326.
And if they ask, I did talk about pest control stuff, okay?
Yes, it is. So we have a Snoopy or the Peanuts poster framed to go for the 50/50, and as well, Gordon was very gracious for a tree diaper, is donating also 6.
6. Your choice in sizes from 16-inch to 36-inch diapers.
So
If you want
please,
to know more, see my booth.
yeah, so please do buy the 50/50 tickets. Also, the money does go towards the tree fund. Tomorrow morning, 7 to 8 is breakfast with the vendors, with also roundtable discussions. We have a variety of tables for everybody to talk. And then the RPAC for tomorrow morning that is on our agenda has been canceled for right now. But that will be, we have more discussions coming with that later on. So thank you, hope to see you next door. Go have a cocktail, enjoy, and talk with each other. Thank you for your attention today.